Hi guys, it's Cozy Book Babe, and we are back with the next two chapters of the Assassin's Blade. They're actually the last two chapters of the Assassin and the Pirate Lord, so we're almost done with the first novella in this book. Chapter 9. Down the slope of the street, Selena could perfectly see the two slave ships sitting, still unmoving, in the bay. Selena bowed her head to the pirate lord. "I'd rather not get my hands dirty in that mess." Rolf's lips formed a thin line. "Funny, given that you tripped the man who started the brawl." Sam glared at her. She'd been subtle, damn it. Rolf drew his sword, the dragon's eyes gleaming in the growing light. "And also funny, since you've been spoiling for a fight for days, that you suddenly decided to vanish when everyone's attention is elsewhere." Sam raised his hands. "We don't want any trouble." Rolf chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "Maybe you don't, Sam Cortland, but she does." Rolf stepped toward her, his sword dangling at his side. "She's wanted trouble since the moment she got here. What was your plan? Steal treasure? Information?" From the corner of her eye, something shifted in the ships. Like a bird flexing its wings, a row of oars shot out from their sides. They were ready, and the chain was still up. "Don't look, don't look, don't look." But Rolf looked, and Selena's breathing turned shallow as he scanned the ships. Sam tensed, his knees bending slightly. "I am going to kill you, Selena Sardothian," Rolf breathed, and he meant it. Selena's fingers tightened around her sword, and Rolf opened his mouth, lungs filling with air as he prepared to shout a warning. Quick as a whip, she did the only thing she could think of to distract him. Her mask clattered to the ground, and she shook off her hood. Her golden hair gleamed in the growing light. Rolf froze. You're... What sort of trickery is this?" Beyond them, the oars began moving, churning the water as the boats turned toward the chain and the freedom beyond it. "Go," she murmured to Sam. "Now." Sam only nodded before he sprinted down the street. Alone with Rolf, Selena raised her sword. "Selena Sardothian, at your service." The pirate was still staring at her, his face pale with rage. "How dare you deceive me?" She sketched a bow. "I did nothing of the sort. I told you I was beautiful." Before she could stop him, Rolf shouted, "They're trying to steal our ships! To your boats! To the watchtower!" A roar erupted around them, and Selena prayed that Sam could reach the watchtower before the pirates caught him. Selena began circling the pirate lord. He circled her too. He wasn't drunk in the least. "How old are you?" Each of his steps was carefully placed, but she noticed that he kept shifting to expose his left side. 16. She didn't bother to keep her voice low and gravelly. Rolf swore. Arobin sent a 16-year-old to deal with me? He sent the best of the best. Consider that an honor. With a growl, the pirate lord lunged. She danced back, swinging up her sword to block the blow he aimed for her throat. She didn't need to kill him right away, just to distract him long enough to prevent him from further organizing his men, and keep him away from the ships. She had to buy Sam enough time to disable the chain and the catapults. The ships were already turning toward the mouth of the bay. Rolf launched himself again, and she let him land 2 strikes on her sword before she ducked the third blow and slammed into him. She swept her foot, and Rolf staggered back a step. Not missing a beat, she pulled out her long hunting knife, slashing for his chest. She let her blow fall short, ripping through the fine blue material of his tunic instead. Rolf stumbled into the wall of a building behind him, but caught his footing and dodged the blow that would have taken off his head. The vibrations of her sword hitting stone stung her hand, but she kept hold of the hilt. "What was the plan?" Rolf panted above the roar of the pirates rushing toward the docks. "Steal my slaves and take all the profit?" She laughed, feinting to his right, but sweeping for his unprotected left with her dagger. To her surprise, Rolf deflected both moves in a swift, sure motion. "To free them," she said. Beyond the chain, beyond the mouth of the bay, the clouds on the horizon began to color with the light of the coming dawn. "Fool," Rolf spat, and this time feinted so well that even Selena couldn't avoid the rake of his sword across her arm. Warm blood seeped through her black tunic. She hissed, darting away a few steps. A careless mistake. You think freeing 200 slaves will solve anything? Rolf kicked a fallen bottle of liquor at her. She knocked it aside with the flat of her sword, her right arm screaming in pain. Glass shattered behind her. There are thousands of slaves out there. Are you going to march into Calicola and Dover and free them too? Behind him, the steady strokes of the oars propelled the ships toward the chain. Sam had to hurry. Rolf shook his head. Stupid girl. If I don't kill you, your master will. Not him giving the luxury of a warning, she threw herself at him. She ducked, twirling, and Rolf barely turned before she slammed the pommel of her sword into the back of his head. There were enough smaller boats heading out that the pirates would overpower them. The pirates had weapons. Aside from whatever was on board the ships, the slaves were unarmed, even if many of them had been warriors and rebels. There was a flash of movement from the half-crumbling tower. Steel glimmered, and there was Sam, charging up the staircase that wound up the outside of the tower. Two pirates rushed down the steps, swords raised. Sam dodged one, knocking him down with a swift strike to the spine. Before the pirate had even finished falling, Sam's blade skewered the other man clean through the middle. But there was still Shipbreaker to disable, along with the two catapults and the dozen pirates who had now reached the foot of the tower. Selena cursed, and was still too far. There was no way she could make it in time to disable the chain. The ships would crash into it long before she got there. She swallowed the pain in her arm, focusing on her breathing as she ran and ran, not daring to take her eyes off the tower ahead. Sam, still a tiny figure in the distance, reached the top of the tower and the expanse of open stone where the anchor to the chain lay. Even from here she could tell it was gargantuan, and as Sam rushed around it, hacking at whatever he could, throwing himself against the enormous lever, both of them realized the horrible truth. The one thing she'd overlooked. The chain was too heavy for one man to move. The slave ships were close now. So close that stopping was impossible. They were going to die, but the slaves didn't cease rowing. The dozen pirates were climbing the stairs. Sam had been trained to engage multiple men in combat, but a dozen pirates? Damn Rolf and his men for delaying her. Sam glanced toward the stairs. He knew about the pirates too. She could see everything with such maddening clarity. Sam remained atop the tower. A level below him, perched on a platform jutting out over the sea, sat the two catapults. And in the bay, the two ships that rode with increasing speed. Freedom or death. Sam slung himself down to the catapult level, and Selena staggered a step as he hurled himself against the rotating platform on which the catapult sat, pushing, 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 until the catapult began to move, not toward the sea, but toward the tower itself, toward the spot in the stone wall where the chain was anchored. She didn't dare take her attention from the tower as Sam heaved the catapult into position. A boulder had already been loaded, and in the glare of the rising sun, she could just make out the rope stretched taut to secure the catapult. The pirates were almost at the catapult level. The two ships rode faster and faster, the chain so close that its shadows loomed over them. Chapter 10. You make a move, and I'll spill your throat on the ground, Rolf hissed, his free hand ripping Selena's dagger from its sheath and tossing it into the brush. Then he took her sword, too. Why not just kill me right now? Rolf's breathy laugh tickled her ear. Because I want to take a long, long while to enjoy killing you. She stared at the half-ruined tower, at the dust still swirling from the catapult's destruction. How could Sam have survived that? Do you know how much your attempt at playing hero cost me? Rolf pushed his blade into her neck, and her skin split open with a stinging burst. 200 slaves, plus 2 ships, plus the 7 ships you disabled in the harbor, plus countless lives. She snorted, Don't forget the ale from last night. Rolf shifted his blade, digging in and making Selena wince despite herself. I'll take that from your flesh, too. Don't worry. How'd you find me? She needed time, needed something to work with. If she moved the wrong way, she'd find herself with a cut throat. I knew you'd follow Sam. If you were so set on freeing the slaves, then you certainly wouldn't leave your companion to die alone. Though I think you arrived a bit too late for that. In the dense jungle, the cries of birds and beasts slowly returned. But the watchtower remained silent, interrupted only by the hiss of crumbling stone. You're going to return with me, Rolf said, and after I'm done with you, I'll contact your master to come pick up the pieces. Rolf took a step, pivoting them toward the town, but Selena had been waiting. Throwing her back into his chest, she hooked her foot behind his. Rolf stumbled, tripping over her leg, and she wedged her hand between her neck and his dagger just as he remembered to act on his promise to slit her throat. Blood from her palm splattered down her tunic, but she shoved the pain aside and butted her elbow into his stomach. Rolf's breath whooshed out of him, and he doubled over, only to meet her knee slamming into his face. A faint crack sounded as her kneecap connected with his nose. When she hurled Rolf to the dirt, blood was on her pant leg, his blood. She grabbed his fallen dagger as the pirate lord reached for his sword. He scrambled to his knees, lunging for her, but she stomped her foot down upon his sword, sending it crashing to the ground. Rolf raised his head just in time for her to knock him onto his back. Crouching over him, she held his dagger to his neck. Well, that didn't go the way you expected, did it? She asked, listening for a moment to ensure no pirates were about to come crashing down the road. But the animals still hooted and screeched, the insects still hummed. They were alone. Most of the pirates were probably brawling in the town. Her hand throbbed, blood pouring out as she grasped the collar of his tunic to lift his head closer to hers. "So," she said, her smirk widening at the blood dripping from his nose, "this is what's going to happen." She dropped his collar and fished out the 2 papers from inside her tunic. Compared to the pain in her hand, the injury on her arm had faded to a dull pulsing. "You are going to sign these and stamp each with your seal." "I refuse," Rolf seethed. "You don't even know what they say." She pushed the tip of the dagger into his heaving throat. "So allow me to clarify. One of these is a letter to my master. It says that the deal is over, that you won't be sending him slaves, and if you catch him entering into another slave trade agreement with anyone else, you'll bring your whole armada to punish him." Rolf joked. "You're insane." "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not done yet." She picked up the second letter. "This one, I wrote this one for you. I did my best to try to write it in your voice, but you'll forgive me if it's a tad more elegant than you're used to being." Rolf struggled, but she pushed the blade a little harder and he stopped. "Basically," she said, sighing dramatically, "this one says that you, Captain Rolf, bearer of the magical map inked on your hand, will never, ever sell a slave again. And if you catch any pirates selling or transporting or trading slaves, you'll hang, burn, or drown them yourself. And that Skulls Bay is forevermore a safe haven for any slaves fleeing a Darlin's clutches." Rolf practically had steam blowing out his ears. "I won't sign either of them, you stupid girl. Don't you know who I am?" "Fine," she said, angling the blade to sink into his flesh more easily. "I memorized your signature when I was in your office that first day. It won't be hard to forge. And as for your seal ring," she removed something else from her pocket, "I also took that the first day in your office, just in case I needed it. Turns out I was right." Rolf croaked as she held it up in her free hand, the garnet flashing in the light. "I figure I can return to town and tell your cronies that you decided to set sail after those slaves and to expect you back in, I don't know, 6 months? A year? Long enough that they won't notice the grave I'll dig for you right off the road here. Frankly, you've seen who I am, and I should end your life for it. But consider it a favor and a promise that if you don't follow my orders, I'll change my decision to spare you." Rolf's eyes narrowed to slits. "Why?" "You'll have to clarify that." He took a breath. "Why go to so much trouble for slaves?" "Because if we don't fight for them, who will?" She pulled a fountain pen from her pocket. "Sign the papers." Rolf raised an eyebrow. "And how will you know that I'm holding true to my word?" She removed the dagger from his throat, using the blade to brush back a strand of his dark hair. "I have my sources, and if I hear that you're trading slaves, no matter where you go, no matter how far you run, I will hunt you down. That's twice now I've disabled you. The third time you won't be so lucky. I swear that on my name. I'm almost 17 and I can already wallop you. Imagine how good I'll be in a few years." She shook her head. "I don't think you'll want to try me now, and certainly not then." Rolf stared at her for a few heartbeats. "If you ever set foot in my territory again, your life is forfeit." He paused, then muttered, "May the gods help Arobin." He took the pen. "Any other requests?" She eased off him, but kept the dagger in her hand. "Why, yes," she said. "A ship would be nice." Rolf only glared at her before he grabbed the documents. When Rolf had signed, stamped, and handed the documents to Celaena, she took the liberty of knocking him out again. Swift blows to 2 points in his neck did the trick, and he'd be out long enough for her to accomplish what she needed, to find Sam. She raced up the half-crumbling stairs of the tower, leaking over pirate corpses and chunks of stone, not stopping until she found the crushed bodies of the dozen pirates who were closest to Sam and the ruins of the catapults. Blood, bone, squished bits of flesh that she didn't particularly care to look at for too long. "Sam!" she shouted, slipping over a bit of debris. She heaved a slab of wood off the side, scanning the landing for any sign of him. "Sam!" Her hand began bleeding again, leaving smears of blood as she turned over stone and wood and metal. Where was he? It had been her plan. If one of them had to die for it, it should have been her, not him. She reached the second catapult, its entire frame snapped in half from a fallen piece of tower. She'd last seen him here. A slab of stone jutted up from where it had hit the landing. It was large enough to have squashed someone beneath. She hurled herself against it, her feet sliding against the ground as she pushed and pushed and pushed. The stone didn't move. Grunting, gasping, she shoved harder. Still, the stone was too large. Cursing, she beat a fist against the gray surface, her injured hand aching in protest. The pain snapped something open, and she struck the stone again and again, clenching her jaw to keep the building scream inside of her. For some reason, I don't think that's going to make the rock move, said a voice, and Selena whirled. Emerging from the other side of the landing was Sam. He was covered head to toe in gray dust, and blood leaked from a cut in his forehead. But he was... She lifted her chin. "I've been shouting for you." Sam shrugged, sauntering over to her. "I figured you could wait a few minutes, given that I saved the day and all." His brows rose high on his ash-covered face. "Some hero," she gestured to the ruin of the tower around them. "I've never seen such sloppy work." Sam smiled, his brown eyes turning golden in the dawn. It was such a Sam look. The twinkle of mischief, the hint of exasperation, the kindness that would always, always make him a better person than she was. Before she knew what she was doing, Selena threw her arms around him and held him close. Sam stiffened, but after a heartbeat, his arms came around her. She breathed him in, the smell of his sweat, the tang of the dust and the rock, the metallic odor of his blood. Sam rested his cheek on her head. She couldn't remember, honestly couldn't recall, the last time anyone had held her. No, wait. It had been a year ago. With Ben, after she'd come back from a mission 2 hours late and with a sprained ankle. He'd been worried, and given how close she'd come to being captured by the royal guards, she was more than a bit shaken. But embracing Sam was different somehow, like she wanted to curl into his warmth. Like for one moment she didn't have to worry about anything or anybody. "Sam," she murmured into his chest. She peeled away from him, stepping out of his arms. "If you ever tell anyone about me embracing you, I'll gut you." Sam gaped at her, then tipped his head back and laughed. He laughed and laughed until dust lodged in his throat and he launched into a coughing fit. She let him suffer through it, not finding it very funny at all. When he could breathe again, Sam cleared his throat. "Come on, Sardothian," he said, slinging an arm around her shoulders. "If you're done liberating slaves and destroying pirate cities, then let's go home." Selena glanced at him sidelong and grinned. And that, my friends, is the end of The Assassin and the Pirate Lord, the first novella in the collection. We will pick up next time with the first chapter of The Assassin and the Healer. Thanks for listening.